Hello and welcome to this video for the strategic case study Q&A session. Now, apologies for the issues that we had earlier where we couldn't access the YouTube stream, but because a lot of you posted a lot of different questions, I would record a video answering those questions and then just post it as a video online. So once again, apologies for that, but those of you who did ask questions, you will get the answer to those questions now. And it's going to start at the very top of the list of questions, which is from Mohammed, who asked that they have done or they are planning to do the 5 Astranti mock exams, including the mock exams, and are those sufficient for getting the best score? Well, again, that's quite a difficult question to answer. In theory, that should be enough to pass, but then it all depends on you. If you are putting in the effort in your mock exams, if you are taking on board your feedback, then it should be enough. If you are not really putting the effort in, then it will most likely not be sufficient. It's really all comes down to you. All that we as tutors, as tuition providers can do is provide you with the tools to help you pass the exam. There's no golden way of just teaching you and as long as you just do this one thing, then you'll pass easily without doing anything else, without putting any other effort in it. It's ultimately about you. And that is a great way to prepare yourself, though, because this exam is more about your ability to identify requirements, your ability to plan effectively, your ability to write effectively, and to produce a solid, well-rounded answer. So as many mock exams as you can take will put you in a better position. It's not just the Astranti mock exams you should be looking at as well. You should be looking at other tuition providers' mock exams. You'd be looking at the Pearson VUE and the CIMA ones that you can access for free online as well, because all of these will help you pass. And it's about getting as much training in, as much practice in as possible. The second question here relates to paragraph sentences, how much to cover a 15-mark task. Now, the CIMA answers for 15 marks generally are about 7 to 8 paragraphs long. And this is okay, but this is pretty much every single word is absolutely imperative. And also a lot of the CIMA answers don't necessarily fulfill some of the competency requirements given by CIMA themselves. So what we suggest is actually that you write around a paragraph for every mark. Now, this may sound like a lot, and it is a lot, but that way you can be far more sure that you will be putting in the amount of effort, the amount of content that is required to get the mark. And we generally believe here at Astranti that we try to over-prepare our students almost, because it's better to be over-prepared than it is to be under-prepared. So we teach them to write as much as possible, to write as comprehensively as possible, to give them the best possible chance of passing. And we've got a question here relating to driverless cars. Should Zoom continue investing in driverless technology, or should they buy more cars? Well, they don't actually buy any cars themselves at the moment. All the cars are leased, and they are not even leased through the company as well. They are leased with car manufacturer, car retailer partnerships. And they do have a system in place now, or they have a plan in place to only allow drivers to use vehicles that are less than 3 years old and vehicles that are hybrids or electric. That's one of their plans going forward. So they are moving, in a sense, in a different direction with regards to cars and the cars that are being operated, but there is no intention to actually have their own cars, to buy cars and then lease them to their independent contractors, or to purchase them and then give them to their independent contractors to use. And that's potentially another one of the advantages of having independent contractors, is they then have to provide their own vehicles. And that's why we don't have a lot of assets, because if we had to buy all these cars, we're already a loss-making company. If we had to buy all these vehicles ourselves, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of vehicles, it would be incredibly expensive. And it would be very difficult for the company to be profitable, particularly given that it's not even profitable at the moment without all these expenses. And with regards to should they continue to invest in driverless cars, it's highly unlikely that that is the direction the company is going to take. The pre-scene repeatedly mentions about driverless cars, repeatedly mentions about the investment that it's putting in, how much money it's putting in, and the potential payoff of it. And the actual CEO of the organization, CIMA, has specifically said that this is the future for the company, this is the future for the industry, this is the future for transport in general. So I find it quite unlikely that she's suddenly going to turn around and say, you know what, we're not actually going to do this anymore. We're going to go in some other completely different direction. I think it's very unlikely. And particularly with driverless cars, there's very much a need to invest now, because this is going to be the future. Generally speaking, it's going to be the future. We know that in Jayland, the government actively likes to contribute and to invest into disruptive technologies. So particularly within Jayland, it's going to be the future. And as a result of that, we need to be investing now. We don't want to be late to the party, so to speak, because if we are late, we are going to be behind. There is going to be the chance that other organizations, other companies will set the industry standard. That is to say, the system that they have in place is the one that everyone has got to use, or there's perhaps a few that everyone can use. There's not going to be hundreds of different systems for driverless cars because they need to be compatible with each other. A car manufacturer is not going to want to make 10 different versions of their new car to fit 10 different driverless car systems. So the system that ultimately is picked, not just in Jayland but potentially globally, is going to be the system to use. And so it's very important to be in on the ground floor, helping shape the future rather than having to react to the future. Another question here relating to the venture capitalists. Assuming the venture capitalists do not produce more funding, do not provide more funding, what are the best sources to obtain finance? And it's a good question, and there is plenty of ways in which they could raise finance, raising further equity by selling to private investors rather than the venture capitalists. There's the chance of selling a portion of the company to a larger business. There is the potential of taking out debt financing. There's no gearing at the organization at the moment, although a bank may be unwilling to lend vast quantities of money to a company that is currently loss-making. The one that I think is particularly relevant for this pre-scene, based on the fact that Uber and Lyft, the two companies that are most relevant to the two companies given in the pre-scene, have done it recently, is the potential to raise additional equity financing by launching on the stock market, by undertaking an IPO. And that's what I think is one of the most likely issues for this exam, is because of that need for funding. It's because of the fact that it's happened in the real world that so many actual companies that are relevant to this particular organization, such as Lyft, have undertaken an IPO, Uber have undertaken an IPO. So I think that is potentially the best way that they're going to raise a substantial amount of finance, a substantial amount of funding. So that would be my key suggestion for raising significant quantities of finance, would be to undertake an IPO. Bradley says, is it really necessary to provide real-life examples and mention the names such as Uber? It's not completely necessary, and CIMA themselves have said that there are no direct marks for using industry examples. However, saying that, the CIMA examiner has specifically said in their examiner reports that they would like people to use real-world examples, because it illustrates that you've done the research. It illustrates that you are thinking strategically, because you are applying it to real-world situations rather than keeping it completely theoretical and hypothetical. And it really does add weight to your points as well, because if, for example, if you're talking about IPOs and we're saying, well, we need to raise additional finance on the stock market, Other companies such as Uber, such as Lyft, have been able to generate vast amounts of equity financing in this fashion. And therefore it suddenly adds a lot more weight, a lot more depth to your answer, because you are showing that there is precedent for it working. And that is going to add value to the response. It's going to add weight to the response and make it sound like a much more practical solution, or a much more potentially suitable and successful solution to the financing, the funding problem. And are we required to address every point in real depth and make a point at 3 to 4 sentences, or can we make them shorter? Well, generally we suggest that you would make your paragraphs around 3 sentences long. So you would introduce the point, explain or apply the point, and then evaluate the point. So you talk about funding, for example. So we talk about, we're going to need additional funding because we've got these expensive expansion plans. We could raise it by methods such as undertaking an IPO to raise equity financing, such as companies like Uber. This will also add prestige to the organization. It will also add security to the organization. And that would be more your evaluation points, while you're explaining the kind of advantages of doing it, the potential knock-on impact of doing it for the organization, which is how you as a strategic student think. You don't think in the here and now necessarily, or exclusively. You don't just think about what is going to have the short-term reactions or the short-term impacts of your decisions. You think of the long-term as well. Jenny asks about what are the strategic aims of Zoom, and that they're looking into driverless technology. And yes, they are looking into driverless technology, but for strategic aim, you have to think more about the mission of the organization. The mission of the organization is to connect people. It's to bring people together to improve the safety and security of transport. So everything that you are suggesting, everything that they are doing, etc., should be linked ultimately to those mission statements and to those goals that were mentioned in the pre-C. So if it doesn't help connect people, if it doesn't help bring people together more safely, doesn't allow people to provide transport more safely, etc., then it arguably isn't going to be something that the company should be doing. So earlier someone mentioned about driving their own cars or producing their own cars and just purchasing vehicles. Now, having their own vehicles is not going to help them provide safe and secure transport if it's any better than the system they currently have. So is it potentially not something that they should be doing, particularly given that it's going to cost so many tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars to do? And I don't think they potentially should be doing that. So the strategic aims are ultimately to do with connecting people. So actually, if you think about alternatives that they could be doing, they potentially might not just be looking at the transport market. So anything that connects people as well, different technologies that connect people, apps, smartphones, etc. Are there any other more social media type apps that they could be looking at creating that will help connect people together? That's almost more where they would be going in terms of being a connecting company. Now, potentially isn't related to transport, but there are plenty of other sort of social media things that could be related to transport, things like TripAdvisor, things like Booking.com, all these sorts of apps which are quite social in their interaction, involve a lot of talking with people, arranging to meet with other people, etc. It's related to travel, but it's a different kind of travel than what is currently being on offer. But what you always need to suggest when you are talking about strategic aims is it's very easy to think of the things that the organization currently isn't doing. But also what you need to think about is what the organization currently is doing. So a strategic aim, your first strategic aim, if you are thinking of what suggestions you're going to make for the company, is to always keep what they are doing well and keep doing it well. Look at what they are doing well, why they are doing it well, and take those lessons and use it for other areas of the organization. They should never compromise on what they are currently doing well. And particularly if you are given a suggestion which ultimately looks at potentially going against what they're currently doing well, then you should be really sure to say we shouldn't be doing this because it goes against what we are currently doing, what makes the business the business. Just states that out of the 3 mocks I've written, I've only managed to get 1 integration mark out of the 27 available. Now, integration marks are quite tricky to say exactly what you should be doing to get them because they are quite arbitrary, they are quite subjective in their application, whether a marker is going to give you them or not. One way that I would look at integration marks is it's ultimately the quality of your script as a whole. So it's not looking at the quality of your content in your individual paragraphs, it's looking at the quality of it as a whole. Does it link together nicely? Do the 2 sections link together nicely? Does your work flow nicely? Do you link the various different parts of the syllabus together? And a good way of doing that is by looking at the SAF model. The SAF model is good for integration marks because it looks at all different areas of the syllabus. It looks at the suitability, it looks at your strategy, it looks at your acceptability, it looks at your stakeholders, it looks at the risk. Is it an appropriate and acceptable level of risk? That's your P3. And it looks at your funding, your resources, your feasibility of the project. Do you need to hire more staff? Again, a stakeholder thing. Do you need to raise additional finance? An F topic. And therefore it's linking all the different bits of the syllabus together effectively. And that is what is going to get you your integration marks. So linking the syllabus together, applying the syllabus effectively, and making sure the quality and the flow of your script as a whole is good are the ways in which you can achieve those integration marks. How will the syllabus change affect the strategic case study? Just in case you are not successful. Well, hopefully you will be successful, but the strategic case study syllabus is not changing until February 2020. It's not like the objective test, which will be being sat under the new syllabus as early as November. It's not until the February 2020 exam. So the November 2019 exam will still be sat on the existing syllabus. Also, with regards to the syllabus change, very little is actually changing with regards to what you will actually be expected to do. The way it is being marked is potentially going to be changed, and we are going to have some clarity from CIMA over the next month or so with regards to that. And they're moving away from these core competencies to the core activities. And the core activities are going to be less focused on specific topics, and they're going to be more about the actual quality of what you are writing. So questions could have a range of core activities in them rather than it being a case of this question is a technical question. This question is a people question. So from a student's perspective, I actually think it's going to be a lot better because it's going to be judging your scripts far more holistically rather than very specific requirements. And that's probably a lot of reasons why students fail, is because they have potentially not made, even though they've been very good overall, they've not made specific sort of checklist requirements for what they have achieved, but they're doing away with that. They're also doing away with the minimum competency requirements or core activity requirements as it will now be. So in the past, you could have passed overall, but you could have failed 1 out of your 4 competencies. You know, you passed this one, you passed this one, you passed this one, you failed this one, and you passed overall. But because you didn't meet the minimum competency requirements here, you failed. They're doing away with that as well. So if you meet the pass mark overall, you will pass regardless of how well you perform in those core activities. So if you pass this one, pass this one, pass this one, fail this one, you'll still pass overall if you've got the minimum requirements overall. So with the right classification of drivers, do we classify them as employees or do we classify them as independent contractors? Well, the CIMA pre-scene says that they are independent contractors, and there will potentially be debates about this in the exam, because in law, in a legal sense, you can't just call someone an independent contractor if you then treat them as an employee. The law will say that you are treating them as employees. I don't think they are treating them as employees in this case because they are not getting the kind of benefits. They're not expected to work at particular times, etc. They are well within their rights to choose exactly when they are and aren't going to work. So I do think they are independent contractors. The issue is whether it's fair to employ independent contractors, particularly if there are issues that the company is charging too much, is price gouging, and therefore people aren't using Zoom services, and the independent contractors aren't getting jobs, they're not getting paid because there's no work available because of actions taken by the organization. So I do expect there to be potential issues around this, perhaps people wanting to be registered as employees. Then of course there might be issues over whether they have to use their own vehicles, whether you can ask an employee to use their own vehicle, whether they're going to have to work on the legalities of that situation there, whether you can give them the right to use their own vehicle, but then they might have to pay them for the right to use their vehicle, etc. Question from Thomas here on integrated reporting and how much they are going to be expected to know about this and the financial reporting standards, etc. Now, with regards to the case study, there's going to be very little on financial reporting standards and things like this. This was tested at F1 and F2 level. It's not going to be a big part of the strategic case study, and you're not going to be directly tested on it. For integrated reporting, they already do have some of their CSR reports and things like that, which might be potentially linked into that, as in, do they have to link that with their financial statements and things like that? But it's quite a small company. It's only operating in one area at the moment, so it'd be quite unlikely for there to be too much on that at this point in time. Obviously, you might be given more information in the unseen, which may change that. And with IT and information strategy risks, do I think this will be a big issue? Will things come up on it? I do think that it could be quite a big issue. It was mentioned specifically in the risk report given to us in the pre-scene. With tech companies, it's always going to be an issue. At the moment, they get a lot of their software from third parties, so that could be a potential risk. If those third parties go out of business, they start charging too much. If they update their software and it's not compatible with the other softwares that we use in creating our apps, that could be an issue. For risks, what I would suggest doing is looking at them from very much the TARA model. The TARA model is a very good way to analyze risks because it gives you the options to solve those risks. So think of transfer, accept, reduce, avoid, etc. Now obviously if it's a fundamental part of our app, we can't avoid it because we need it. But at the same time, if it's going to potentially have a massive impact on the business, we can't just accept that risk. So could we transfer more of our software to an outsourcer who specializes in managing those software? If you go through those different options and you analyze which ones would and wouldn't work, that is a very good way of fleshing out your answer, which is what you have also asked here, is how do we add weight to our answer? And also, if investment appraisal comes up, is it appropriate to use the SAF model? Now, those of you who've listened to me speak before in my masterclasses, etc., it is a very appropriate model for many, many things. It's one of my favorite models to suggest to use just because it does cover everything. Investment appraisal is a perfect time to use it. Strategy. Does the end result tie with our strategy? No matter how profitable it is this going to help us connect people? Is it going to help us provide safer, cleaner transport? If it isn't, then potentially it's not what we should be doing. Is it acceptable to our stakeholders? Is it going to have an appropriate level of risk? Can we fund it? Is it going to be feasible in terms of the resources that we have? In fact, it would be a perfect model to use. So I wouldn't actually suggest any other model other than the SAF model. Well, there are other models to use, but the SAF model is the most appropriate model to use. So I wouldn't suggest a better model than that. Hannah is asking here about hedge accounting. Hedge accounting is very unlikely to come up at the moment because until they start doing anything abroad, there is going to be absolutely no need for hedge accounting in the first place. If they do decide to trade abroad, set up overseas, etc., then it becomes an issue. But because you would need to be considering that in the first place before it would come up. I think it's going to be more of an add-on question to a potential opportunity to start trading abroad, rather than there being a whole question about it. Now, for example, in the previous pre-scene, there was a whole section in the pre-scene about hedge accounting, and they did a lot of business overseas. So in that instance, hedge accounting is a likely issue, and hedge accounting did come up, but it's not a particularly likely issue for this particular pre-scene, because at the moment there is no, they would have to change what they are currently doing for hedge accounting to even become an issue. So you're already putting in potential hypothetical situations in place before it even becomes slightly relevant. So I don't think it's going to be a huge issue. And someone else actually has already answered your question there about it not actually being relevant until it has, or till they start trading abroad. Question there about recording. Well, unfortunately, we weren't able to record the actual live class. That's why I'm recording this video for you now. And of course, when you see it, of course, it will be already relevant, or will be up online. Yes, we could get a question about drivers wanting to be known as employees. There are obviously benefits to them for this, as in they get employee protection, they get a much more guaranteed wage, although there is potential issues that they might be put on 0-hour contracts or things like that, and that could be an issue for them as well. The appropriate way to deal with this is, if they do strike, as you suggested here, is that it's very easy for them to get other drivers, and they're hiring lots of new drivers and all these sorts of things as independent contractors at the moment. So unless they do it en masse, it might be quite difficult for them to actually, for the independent contractors to have weight in the argument. However, the public would generally be on the independent contractor side, they'll be on the driver's side, because it's always the case when you've got a massive corporation is already giving these people a tough trip or tough deal in terms of what they are offering them, what they're giving them. They're not guaranteeing them wage. In the UK, there's been all this stuff about 0 hours contracts, etc. So the appropriate way to handle it would be to consider the views of all stakeholders, to consider both parties, to try and get them on a negotiating table, and then see where that takes us. Now, can't suggest exactly what they should be doing yet, because we have no idea. It's a hypothetical situation. We don't know if they are striking or if they're threatening it. We don't know what they're asking for at the moment. These are all questions that would need to be answered in the unseen. But always a starting point with regards to anything like that, with like negotiations, etc., is to start from a point of collaboration and negotiation rather than trying to be dismissive about it. Can we say that all the venture capitalists own all the shares? It'd be very difficult to say that. I don't think that would be the case at the moment. The owners of the company would definitely still have a significant portion of the shares. I think venture capitalists will have a majority of the shares. I think they'll probably have 50 to 60% of the shares, potentially more, but they won't own all 100% of it, because if they did, it would be unlikely that necessarily the owners would still be having as much power as they can, because the venture capitalists would be able to put other people in place, although venture capitalists generally do sit back a bit, and it doesn't seem like they are getting too involved in the running of the organization. We also don't know how many venture capitalists there are. Now, it could be that it was almost on a crowdfunding type thing for venture capitalists, and we've got hundreds and hundreds of venture capitalist firms who have all invested a very small amount of money in each, or it could be that there's a couple who have invested hundreds of millions of dollars in each. But it definitely it's more than likely there's still going to be shareholdings by the owners of the company. And how do we know how much money is being generated from the bike sharing versus the ride hailing versus the ride sharing? And yes, that would be a good thing to know that wasn't given to us in the pre-scene. But if we are given it, one thing that would be good about it was you could determine the profitability of each particular section. You could determine whether or not the bike sharing was vastly more profitable than the ride-hailing service, and then you could take appropriate actions. If bike sharing is so much more profitable, then perhaps we need to focus more on building the bike sharing part of the business. And should Zoom give out free shares to managers? That's potentially a way of offering bonuses, etc. It would be difficult to do right now because the company is obviously not profitable, and so that you could argue that the shares aren't really worth too much, and it could be very difficult for them to make anything of the shares because the company is a private company at the moment, so it's not like they are a tradable commodity to the same extent. A question here about a data breach happening. So if a data breach had happened, information had been stolen by hackers, should they make that public? Yes, they should, because it's incredibly unethical to not release the information. And Uber, now if you're asking about industry examples, did the same thing. They had a lot of information stolen, including confidential customer information, credit card information, etc., and they didn't publish it, they didn't release it, and it was only found out a long time later. And that actually had far worse of an impact than the breach itself. So they should always mention it. They should always let people know and let them know to take appropriate action if need be. It will annoy the public, yes, but it's half the damage that it will be if you let it go on. How may betas be used? Well, betas may be used particularly if the company is trying to launch on the stock market and need to come up with an appropriate price for the organization. As a private company, there is no direct price for the company yet, so they use industry betas to form an appropriate price, appropriate earnings base, and things like that, a method of analyzing the wealth and worth of the organization. So looking at the industry betas of other transport network companies is how they may be used in the exam. Sally's asking, how do you make sure that you fulfill the competency requirements? I didn't say that the competencies were important in terms of you have to meet a certain amount, but there is no different way to answer a technical question, business question, people question, leadership question. It's all the same. Don't waste your time trying to identify which question is in which competence. So I wouldn't bother doing that. Just answer the question asked, just put that out of your head, answer the question asked, and you'll be fine. You'll pass this exam. Question about audit committees. Yes, there was no real mention about the audit committees, or whether there was an audit committee. If they do list on the subject, they'll have to have an audit committee. And so that would be potentially something I would suggest if you were talking about how they're going to improve their internal auditing, how they would improve their internal risk management, because it's the job of the audit committee to install that throughout the organization. So just looking through final questions. I don't see any more on the YouTube list. So I'll bring this video to a close. Again, sorry for the issues we had earlier with the live chats. It just wasn't working for us here. We were frantically trying and restarting it and creating new ones, and it just was not working. YouTube just was not working for the particular time for it. So again, really sorry about that. I know you had given up half an hour of your time for it, and we certainly didn't want that to happen. But I have recorded a video now, hopefully answering all the questions that you had posted into that chat group. So thank you very much for watching this video, and do get in touch if you have any other questions, and I wish you the best of luck in your exam next week.